For nearly 5 decades, Graceland stood frozen in time, honoring Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll.
A locked door, a brass key untouched since 1977, and a room that Elvis Presley's own family refused to enter for nearly 5 decades. When that door finally opened, what waited inside didn't just surprise the people standing there. It forced them to rewrite what they thought they knew about the most famous man in American music. Graceland was never supposed to become a mystery. In March of 1957, a 22-year-old Elvis Presley paid $102,500 for a limestone mansion on the edge of Memphis, Tennessee, a staggering sum at the time, and the down payment on a legend. He kept the name the previous owners had given it. Graceland, what started as a home for a young man who had grown up with almost nothing, quickly became something else entirely. A stage set for a life that the whole world wanted to watch. Horses grazed the 14 acres. A chimpanzee named Scatter, dressed in tiny suits, wandered the grounds and occasionally grabbed drinks out of startled guests' hands. By 1964, Elvis had built a meditation garden behind the house, a quiet space of white columns and fountains where he could sit alone, away from the noise of fame that never seemed to stop. Downstairs, the jungle room, with its green shag carpet climbing the walls, became a symbol of everything loud and theatrical about his taste. Upstairs, behind doors few people ever saw open, was a different Elvis, private, guarded, and increasingly unwell. On August 16, 1977, that private world collapsed in public view. Elvis's girlfriend, Ginger Alden, found him unresponsive on the bathroom floor that afternoon. His road manager and longtime friend, Joe Esposito, began CPR while an ambulance raced toward Baptist Memorial Hospital. By 3:30 that afternoon, Elvis Presley was pronounced dead. He was 42 years old. Within hours, the story of his death was already being written, and as later evidence would suggest, rewritten. Shelby County Medical Examiner Dr. Jerry Francisco told reporters the cause was cardiac arrhythmia, describing it publicly as a natural heart failure. It was a clean explanation for a complicated ending. But the toxicology report that followed weeks later told a far messier story. Multiple prescription substances were found in Elvis's system, at levels that raised serious questions about what natural causes really meant. At the center of that question was Dr. George Nichopoulos, known to nearly everyone as Dr. Nick, who had served as Elvis's personal physician since 1967. Records later reviewed by Tennessee authorities showed that in the final 8 months of Elvis's life, Dr. Nick had written prescriptions totaling more than 10,000 doses of medication. The year before, in 1976, the number was even higher. Dr. Nick maintained that Elvis suffered from real, diagnosed conditions, chronic pain linked to an old injury, glaucoma, and a gastrointestinal disorder, and argued that controlling the medications himself was safer than letting Elvis obtain them elsewhere. In 1980, he stood trial on charges connected to overprescribing, not only for Elvis, but for other patients as well. A jury found him not guilty, but the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners kept investigating for years afterward, and in 1995, nearly 2 decades after Elvis died, they permanently revoked his medical license. It was a quiet, almost anticlimactic end to a case that had shaped how the entire country understood Elvis's final years. Not everyone accepted that the full story had been told. In 2020, author Sally A. Hodel published research suggesting Elvis may have suffered from an inherited condition called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, a disorder affecting the lungs and liver that could help explain his declining health, his weight changes, and his reliance on medication in ways that went beyond simple addiction. Her work reframed a familiar tragedy, not excusing what happened, but complicating it, suggesting that genetics and undiagnosed illness may have been fighting alongside, or against, everything else working against him. For nearly 50 years, Graceland itself became a kind of monument to that unfinished story. When it opened to the public in 1982, 5 years after Elvis's death, visitors were allowed to walk through the living room with its stained glass peacocks, the kitchen where he made his famous peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and the meditation garden, where he was ultimately laid to rest beside his mother Gladys, after a break-in attempt at his original burial site forced his father Vernon to move both graves onto the family's own land. But one part of the house stayed permanently off limits. The staircase leading to the upstairs was roped off. The bedroom where Elvis spent his final hours was never open to tourists. And above it all, sealed behind a locked door, sat the attic, a space the Presley family maintained quietly for decades, without ever explaining exactly what was inside or why it had to remain closed. Then, in the spring of 2024, Graceland's future was suddenly thrown into chaos for reasons that had nothing to do with the past. A company calling itself Nichopoulos Investments and Private Lending LLC filed court documents in Shelby County, Tennessee, claiming that Lisa Marie Presley, who had died unexpectedly in January 2023 at the age of 54, had taken out a multi-million-dollar loan against the property years earlier and defaulted on it. The filing sought to force a public auction of Graceland itself. Riley Keough, Lisa Marie's daughter and the sole trustee of the Presley estate following her mother's death, moved immediately to stop it, arguing in court that the signatures on the loan documents were forged and that no such loan had ever existed. Her legal team raced to file an emergency injunction in Shelby County Chancery Court just days before the scheduled sale. A judge agreed, halting the auction and calling Graceland an irreplaceable piece of American cultural history. Notably, no representative from Nichopoulos Investments ever appeared to defend the claim in court. Investigators later identified a Missouri woman, Lisa Janine Finley, as the alleged architect of the scheme, and she was subsequently charged with mail fraud and aggravated identity theft in federal court. The house that survived decades of grief, rumor, and relentless public curiosity had nearly been lost to a scheme built entirely on paper. It was against that backdrop, a family reminded sharply of how fragile their hold on Graceland could be, that new attention turned toward the one place inside the mansion that had never been documented at all. For almost half a century, the attic had been maintained but never entered, its small air conditioning unit kept quietly running by maintenance staff who were never told what it was protecting. According to the family, the space had been arranged, likely by Elvis himself or those closest to him, into sections that mirrored the chapters of his own life. Boxes marked with years and places, from his boyhood in Tupelo through his Army service, his Hollywood years, and his final Las Vegas residencies. Among the items described were deeply personal artifacts. A worn childhood teddy bear patched with fabric from his mother Gladys's own clothing, a well-used Bible marked with verses he had underlined in his final weeks, and a stack of books on Eastern philosophy and spirituality that revealed a man wrestling with questions far removed from the rhinestone image most fans knew. There were reportedly reel-to-reel recordings of private practice sessions from 1976, unpolished and unreleased, along with an intensely personal, unaccompanied recording of Unchained Melody that observers who heard it described as raw almost to the point of discomfort, a man months from death, singing as though he already sensed what was coming. Whether every detail of what has been described from that space will ever be independently verified is still an open question, and the Presley family has kept much of it private rather than releasing it publicly. But what has been shared paints a picture strikingly different from the myths that grew up around Elvis's death. The sightings, the conspiracy theories claiming he faked his own passing, the decades of tabloid headlines insisting the king was still out there disguised, living quietly among the people who loved his music. Those theories, however comforting to some fans, always avoided a harder truth. That a 42-year-old man, surrounded by wealth, fame, and people who should have protected him instead watched his health collapse in full view of everyone around him. The attic, if the accounts are accurate, holds no evidence of an elaborate escape. It holds the evidence of a man keeping score of his own life, quietly, methodically, as though he understood that one day someone would need to make sense of who he really was. Once the jumpsuits and the headlines were stripped away, somewhere in that room, alongside gold records and stage costumes the public already knew by heart, sat unopened letters from soldiers, from grieving families, from young musicians asking for advice, voices Elvis never got the chance to answer. Graceland survived the auction. It survived the rumors. And in opening that door, the family didn't just preserve a house. They preserved the last honest record of a man who spent his whole life performing for everyone else, and it turns out, was quietly trying to be understood by no one but himself.